All right, so if I'm looking at question number 1, 2 over 3x plus 1 over 2 equals 4x, 4 over x plus 4 over 3. So first of all, everything's a fraction, and that's not going to be the case in all of these questions, but in this particular one. But why is this one just a little different than what we did yesterday? What's in my denominators that we did not have yesterday? Variables, x's, okay. Why is this different? Because what we're doing is we're solving for x, correct? So when we do that, we have to think about fractions. And there is one particular number that is never allowed to be in the bottom of the fraction. Do you remember what that number is? What can we not divide by? 0, okay? So we cannot ever have 0 in the bottom of a fraction. Since we don't know what x is, we have to keep that into consideration. And we have to talk about learning how to state our restrictions. What a restriction is what x cannot equal. Okay? How do I do that? What I have to do is I have to look at every denominator that has a variable in it, and I have to decide what number is going to make that denominator turn to 0. I am not going to be able to have that number as a solution, so therefore that is going to be my restriction. All we have to do is pay attention to the denominators that have variables in them. I'm going to start with this first one. What does 3x mean? It means 3 times x, right? So what I need to think about is what number would I multiply 3 by to equal 0? 3 times what equals 0? 0. So what that means is I cannot have 0 as a solution in this question. If I get 0 as a solution, I have to throw it in the garbage can and I can't use it. Okay? So my restriction is going to be stated as x cannot equal 0. Okay, is that part of my answer? No. I just have to keep that in mind as I'm going through and solving this equation and then checking to see, did I get what I was supposed to not have? Does that make a little bit of sense? Does everybody understand where I got 0 from? Okay, 3 times what gives me 0. If you're not sure when you're doing these, all you have to do is take that denominator, set it equal to 0, and solve for x. And that tells you what x would make this thing 0. Well, in order to solve this for x here, I'd have to divide by 3. And 0 divided by anything is just 0. That's where that restriction came from. That's what x cannot equal. What about my other denominator that has a variable in it? It just looks like what? It just looks like x. That's just 1 times x, correct? So in this case, 1 times what would give you 0? 0. So it's the same restriction. A lot of the times you're going to have the same one. Sometimes you'll have multiple as we get into harder questions. But in the beginning, it's going to be like this. So kind of a hint is if your denominator is a number times x, your restriction is always going to be 0. Or if it's just x, it's 0. You will turn into another number if I do x plus 1 or x minus 2. Then it will turn into something else that I can't have. But for now, it's going to stay 0. Now, the next step after we figure out what we can't get for an answer is just like we did yesterday, coming up with our common denominator. It's only our denominators are going to involve variables now. So let's start with the numerical part. My denominators, the numbers are 3, 2, and 3. What would a common denominator be for 3, 2, and 3? 6, okay? But because I have variables in my denominator, I also have to include the x. So my common denominator in this case is going to be 6x. Now let's talk about multiplying these through and what happens with them. I'm just going to go ahead and write out each one real quick. So we're going to start by multiplying 6x by that first fraction, 2 over 3x. What is 6x over if it's a whole number? So what we think about is being able to simplify things that are on top and things that are on the bottom that have something in common. I'm going to start with my numbers. Hold on, I can't get this right. How many times does 3 divide into 6? 2. So that 3 disappears or turns to 1. That 6 reduces to a 2. What else do you see that might go away? X and X divide each other out, don't they? Cancel each other out is what we call it. So I can cross those out. Once my entire denominators are gone, once everything in my denominator is gone, then I just multiply the leftover parts. So I'm going to multiply 2 times 2, which means this whole thing is just going to turn into 4. So the result of multiplying 6x times 2 over 3x is going to be 4. Does that make a little bit of sense?
How is the denominator not 0 now that you cancel out the 3x?
Okay. When you divide by 3, that turns to 1. When you divide by x, that turns to 1. So 1 times 1 is 1. Does that make a little bit of sense? Okay. Is everybody okay with those? All right, let's multiply the next one. 6x times 1/2. Again, that 6 is over 1. Start with the denominator. How many times does 2 divide into 6? 3. So that 2 is going to turn to the 1. That 6 turns to a 3. Is everything gone out of my denominators now? Yeah. So I'm going to multiply the leftover parts. 3 times x times 1 is 3x. So that's going to be the result of multiplying 6x times 1/2. This one or this one? This one? I divided by 2. 2 divided by 2 turns to 1. Does that make sense? Kind of. What I'm doing is I'm just dividing. These both have a 2 in common, so I divided each one of them by 2.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So we don't have to multiply the denominator.
Then we didn't use a big enough common denominator. The goal here is to always make those denominators go to 1, which means they disappear. Okay. If your denominators don't turn to 1 and disappear, you did not use a large enough common denominator. Okay. The whole purpose is to get rid of the denominators so that we can solve the equations without fractions. Is everybody following me? All right, let's do the next one. Let's do 6x times 4 over x. And the reason I'm putting this first one over 1 is because we can only simplify something at the top with something at the bottom, either in the same fraction or 2 different fractions. But you can't simplify 2 things that are at the top or 2 things that are at the bottom. Do I have any numbers in my denominator that can reduce? No. All I have is a variable, right? So this x is going to do what with that x? Cancel each other out. Yep. That is now gone. Okay. Denominators being 1 means they're gone. And so all I have to do is multiply the leftover parts, which is 6 times 4, which gives me 24. All right, and then we're going to multiply that 6x times that last fraction, 4 over 3. Always start in the denominator. How many times does 3 divide into 6? 2. Okay, so that 3 is going to go to 1 because I divided by 3. That 6 is going to turn to 2. Do I have anything else in my denominators that I need to get rid of? Okay, so let's multiply the leftovers. 2 times x times 4 is 8x. Now finish. Solve the rest of that equation. You should end up, once you multiply everything through by your common denominator, you should end up with 4 plus 3x equals 24 plus 8x. We can continue to solve this equation. Once you find out what x is, the only other thing I need you to do is look at that x. Did you get what you said you weren't supposed to get? If you didn't, then fine, that's the answer. If you did, then we need to talk about what we're supposed to put as the answer at that point. Remember, you may not start solving your equation the same way I do, as long as your x is the same as I get. Oops, I left my x off there. What is 20 divided by negative 5? Negative 4. Okay. Am I allowed to have negative 4 as an answer? Yes. So then I just circle it and I move on. Is everyone kind of okay? All right. I want you to try number 2. Just FYI, you should get a fraction as an answer here. Remember, state your restriction first. What is not equal. Figure out your common denominator. Multiply by that. Solve the remaining equation. Double check. It looks like we are all getting it done. So let's start with my restrictions. In my denominators is 6 times x and 3 times x. Either one, my restriction is x cannot be 0. So And again, is that part of the answer that I'm going to write down? No, I just have to keep that in my brain so that when I do get my answer, I'm not getting something I'm not allowed to have. The denominators are 6x and 3x, so what would I use for my common denominator? 6x. Don't forget about 7. He needs to be multiplied by 6x too. Okay, 7 times 6x is 42x. Bring down the minus sign. When I multiply 6x times 1 over 6x, what do both of the 6x's do? Cancel, and it just leaves me with that numerator of 1. And then when I multiply 6x times 10 over 3x, 3 makes 6 turn to 2, and then the x's cancel, so we multiply 2 times 10, which gives me 20. And so I end up with an equation that says 42x minus 1 equals 20. So far, so good. I'm going to continue to solve. I'm going to add 1 to both sides. That's going to give me 42x equals 21. Be very careful, and this is something that happens every year, no matter how many times I tell you to be careful with it. We look at 21 and 42 and say, oh, well, 21 goes into 42 twice, so my answer is 2. You have to solve the equation. What is it I'm dividing both sides by? 42. Okay, so when you do that, please be careful. Don't just say, oh, it's 2. And I'm not picking on anybody. I'm not trying to say, it's just something that I see every single year. And it's just you trying to rush through instead of thinking about what you're doing to finish solving. And then if I have 21 over 42, that can reduce all the way down to what fraction? 1/2. Is that what I wasn't supposed to get? No. So that is my answer. Does that make sense? Is everybody okay with that one? All right, write down 3. We're going to work through this one together. It is very similar, but also slightly different. The only difference is in my denominator, I have a binomial now instead of a monomial. So I have 2 terms rather than 1, which is going to change my restriction. And it's also going to change what my common denominator is going to look like. I've got 3x over x plus 2 minus 4 equals 2 over x plus 2. So let's start with your restriction. If you can't think about it in your head, take that denominator, set it equal to 0, and solve. What plus 2 equals 0? -2. Okay? So x cannot equal -2. Again, if you're not sure where I got that from, let me show you. I just took the entire denominator, x plus 2. I set it equal to 0, and I solved for x. That tells me what number is going to make that equal 0, and that's where that -2 came from. So far, so good. Now, when our denominators are binomials, we need to think about them as a whole. So it's x plus 2, not x and 2, but x plus 2. The good news is in this question, aren't both of my denominators identical? Yeah. So to make them disappear, I would just need to multiply the entire thing by what is the denominator? X plus 2. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. Write it up here so I can show you. All right, so starting with the first one, if I multiply x plus 2 times 3x over x plus 2, what is this whole thing going to do with this whole thing? Cancel out. Remember, we're treating it as a whole piece, not 2 individual pieces, but as a whole. So that x plus 2 that I'm multiplying is going to cancel that entire x plus 2, which is just going to leave me with what at the top? 3x. So that's the result for multiplying x plus 2 times 3x over x plus 2. Yes? Okay. Now I need to multiply that 4. I'm going to bring down that minus sign. I'm also going to bring down that 4, and it needs to be multiplied by the entire x plus 2. So for now, I'm just going to put that in parentheses. There is no fraction to get rid of in that point, so it's just that whole number 4 that has to be multiplied by the entire x plus 2. So I'm putting it in parentheses so that I don't forget to distribute. Everybody good? And then the last fraction, when I multiply x plus 2 times 2 over x plus 2, what happens? The x plus 2's cancel out, and I'm left with just 2. So that cancels with that, leaving me with just the 2. Finish solving it. Make sure when you're distributing that 4 that it gets distributed as what kind of 4? Can I ever leave an equation or a solution as a negative x equals a number? No, we always have to get rid of that negative by dividing by 1. And so what did you get for x here? Negative 10. Okay. What was my restriction? Negative 2. So negative 10 is going to be okay? Which part am I looking at? The 3x minus 4x? I did. I got that negative x that's right below it. Sorry. I just didn't say that. Quick question. What if I had gotten negative 2? What do you think I should put for my answer? If I got an answer I can't use, but I don't have any other options, what would we say for this question? No solution. Okay, so if you ever run across a question where you get the answer you're not supposed to get, you're just going to cross that out and you're going to put no solution. I got one more I want you to try by yourself. It is very similar to 3. I set the bottom. I'll move it up in just a minute. I'm just going to say be careful when you're circling your answer. You're like, oh, I got it. And without that answer. People were writing 3, so I didn't wanna. The issue with these questions like this is we get like, oh, I got an answer, I'm good, I'm done. You gotta think about it when the variable's in the denominator. You have to think about that answer. Question: what is it P cannot equal? 1. 1 minus 1 is 0, so therefore my restriction is P cannot be 1. What would my common denominator be? P minus 1, yep. When I multiply that first fraction, the P minus 1's just cancel, leaving me with that numerator. Then I'm going to multiply P minus 1 times 3, so I'm going to put that in parentheses for now. And then when I multiply P minus 1 times 2 over P minus 1, the P minus 1's do what again? Cancel out. So, let's see, that's 2P. I'm going to distribute here, maybe. If my pen would write, 3P minus 3, bring down that plus 2. I'm going to combine the terms, a negative 3 and a positive 2 is what? Negative 1. Negative 3 plus 2, right? Then I need to get the p's together, so I'm going to take that 3p and subtract it over. Positive 2, negative 3 is going to give me a negative 1p equals negative 1. And again, we can't leave a negative variable, so I'm going to divide both sides by negative 1. And I get an answer. What is that answer? 1. And a lot of people put 1 in circle and said, I'm done. Why are we not done? That's what I can't have. P cannot equal 1. So if I get 1, that has to go into garbage, which means my answer is no solution. You can either write the words no solution or you can just put the symbol for no solution. But with these questions that have variables in the denominator, you have to check, did I get what I was not supposed to? Okay, don't forget about that part. Does anybody have any questions? All right.